Hello everyone, welcome back to today's video. Be sure to like, share, and check out the author Kira as again they have some really good work. The link will be in the description down below. And with that, let's begin. Chapter 37. Human. Kirishima liked to think he was a fairly heavy sleeper. His sister would jump on his bed about 20 times in the morning and he would still sleep through it. So, when he woke up at who knows what hour at night, or was it morning now, he knew something was wrong. Straightening up on his futon, he tried to listen to whatever was the reason behind his impromptu wake-up call. Banging could be heard coming from the room next to his. Noise that sounded vaguely like a scuffle or perhaps stuff behind thrown around. Racking his brain for a moment, he came to a horrible realization. Midoriya's room was next to his. He felt stupid for not making the connection sooner. However, this still didn't explain what was happening. Knowing he had taken enough time thinking about it, he quickly made his way out of his dorm room. Gratitude swelled in Izuku's heart as he stepped into his room. The school having taken the no-work rule to heart, effectively making the chore of unpacking easier for him. Thus, an exact copy of his room at Aizawa's stood in front of him. However, as the daylight faded away and the darkness of the night slowly set in, he wished for any kind of chores, any kind of distraction to keep his mind busy and off the suffocating thoughts that plagued it. The only escape being the tiny nightlight that Aizawa had bought him. Its light the only beacon keeping him sane in the solitude of his small dorm room. He missed his guardian already. This was the first time since his rescue that he found himself alone. Of course, Aizawa had offered him a room in his own apartment on campus. However, Izuku didn't want to burden the man more than he had in the past few months. Sucking it up, he did the only rational thing he could think of. He slept with lights on. Of course, this wasn't a permanent solution, or really a solution at all. He just hoped that maybe, just maybe, the light would help keep the terrors away. Keep his consciousness from wandering into the deepest depth of his mind. Keeping his all-too-vulnerable heart from getting crushed under the fear and hopelessness that came with the darkness. It didn't. Midoriya, it's Kirishima. Are you awake? He spoke through the wooden barrier separating them. Silence. The only response to his question, if not for the ongoing sound of the scuffle. Hey dude, is everything okay in there? Knowing that no response would assuage his worry, he tried opening the door on his own. Surprisingly, it was unlocked. The lights were on. Did that mean that Midoriya was awake? The noise was gone. Stepping in further, his eyes caught onto the sleeping form of his classmate. At first glance, someone would think that Izuku was sleeping peacefully. However, the sweat covering his forehead and the slight tremor of his shoulders suggested otherwise. On further notice, he spotted a couple of tear tracks staining the teen's face. Midoriya looked so small at that moment, his white hair only accenting the pallor of his skin. A nightmare. Yet, it didn't explain the noise he heard. His decision to step closer was interrupted by the most gut-wrenching sound he had ever encountered. The teen in front of him having cried out as soon as Kirishima moved closer, as if sensing the intrusion, expecting it. Izuku had green tendrils surrounding his body, his quirk activating even while he was resting. The energy emitted effectively making the content of the room vibrate in their place. That explains it. Midoriya's nightmare must have triggered his body's defenses. He didn't want to find out what kind of horrors his friend must be seeing for this to happen. He just wished he could make it stop. He knew that he wasn't the best person to be doing this. However, he couldn't forgive himself if he allowed his friend to go through this alone. He needed to wake him up. In hindsight, Kirishima really should have called Aizawa. As soon as he stepped closer, his foot caught onto one of the many objects in the room that had crashed onto the floor under the energy the teen was emitting in his sleep. The plastic bottle, at least that's what he thought it was, cracked under the weight and was sent rolling into the far side of the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Slowly he lifted his eyes back up to Midoriya's sleeping form. However, the teen wasn't asleep anymore. From the glazed sheen in his eyes, he wasn't fully awake either. Izuku had shoved himself against the wall, his whole body shivering as he seemed to try and make himself as small as possible. No, please, the boy repeated over and over again, his features overcome with terror. All that fear directed straight at the redhead. Although, it seemed the teen was looking right through him, not really taking in the fact that he wasn't a threat. Not again, please, don't. It broke something in him, seeing his friend drown in his own fears, see him living his nightmares right before his eyes. Midoriya, it's okay. It's just me. At first, it seemed like Midoriya wasn't hearing him. However, as he repeated the phrase, he seemed to be breaking through whatever haze had taken over his friend. It's okay, it's just me. Kirishima. The teen's voice was so small. It reminded him just how young they were, just how unfair life really was. He could see it, the fear slowly residing in those forest green eyes, relief and awareness taking over as the teen dropped back into reality. Yeah, it's me, you're safe. I am sorry. Embarrassment and shame rose to the surface as Izuku looked at the wreckage in his room, at the sadness in his classmate's eyes. Don't worry, man. You have nothing to be sorry for, the redhead assured hurriedly. Do you want me to call someone? Aizawa or Shinsu maybe. I could call sensei. No, Izuku couldn't help but raise his voice slightly, although he regained his composure a second later. It's not necessary. I wouldn't want to disturb them. The last thing he wanted was Aizawa to worry more than he already did. The man had done so much for him. He deserved some rest. I don't think he'd mind, man. He cares a lot about you. The redhead argued softly. I am fine. Don't worry. I'm used to nightmares by now. The last sentence was mumbled, not really meant for anyone to hear. Yet, the teen heard him nonetheless, a frown forming on his features at the words. If you want to talk about them, you know I'm here for you, man. We all are. The sheer determination in those fiery red eyes was almost enough to convince Midoriya, almost being the key word. Thanks, but I don't really want to. And maybe I'll later. Sure, I just want you to feel better. Are you okay to go back to sleep now? Izuku nodded his head in response, silently hoping that Kirishima would leave without further inquiries. I'll be just next door, Midoriya. So, if you need anything at all, my door is always open. It seems the redhead got the hint after that. For, a few minutes later, Izuku was once again alone in his room. He didn't sleep after that. Light shines through 1A's classroom windows. A calm atmosphere surrounding the students as each one of them slowly shed the remnants of their sleepiness. It was their first official class ever since before the training camp. The principal didn't want to postpone it anymore. Now that Izuku was up and about, the boy in question was currently trying to keep his eyes open and his head off his desk, making sure to lower his hat as much as possible, trying to cover all his hair inside it. The last couple of nights were taking their toll on him. His nightmares were getting worse. The oppressing darkness that came with nightfall didn't help in his quest for a good night's sleep. Aizawa had tried to get him to stay at the dorms for a few more days. He didn't want to, though. He didn't want to be left alone with his thoughts for long. Besides, he didn't want to fall behind. On top of all of that, Kirishima kept sending him worried glances throughout the weekend. He'd even catch him whispering about him to Uraraka and the others. A part of him wanted to be grateful for his friends and the fact that they were worried about him. It brought warmth to his heart and hope. Although, there was this other part, a smaller voice in his head. It whispered and judged, telling him how much of a burden he was, turning his friend's worry into something else, something entirely different. He was just a burden, after all, just annoying and disturbing his friends. Kirishima kept waking up because of him. He probably was just getting frustrated with him. He found himself believing that voice, with every glance from his friends, with every whisper he heard. The door to the room opened suddenly, Aizawa shuffling into the room tiredly a moment later, trying to calm his racing heart. Izuku lifted his eyes towards his guardian's form. It felt weird not seeing Aizawa as much anymore. The man checked in on him many times during the weekend. It was still different though, not being able to watch movies at night with him or just sit and talk when he wanted to. He supposed it was for the best. He wasn't the best company to keep at the moment. He tries. It's not that he's not trying. It's just hard. Hard to go back as if nothing happened. Hard to ignore the nightmares, the dread that fills him every time he walks into a dark room or hears a strange noise. Every time he looks at Kaminari, or looks into Dark Shadow's body. Aizawa meets his gaze with a strange look. The man's eyes seem to ask a question, as if he were speaking to him out loud. Are you good? They ask. Are you okay? With a slight nod, the teacher takes it as his cue to start. They don't really learn anything new. Izuku tries to focus on the lesson, but his mind keeps wandering. Not to anything specific, but mostly just blankness. In the end, Aizawa just announces a rundown of their new schedule and the plans for their upcoming training. The provisional license exam was just around the corner. The bell rings soon enough and the students are back in motion. Izuku feels himself getting up on autopilot. He feels disassociated with the world around him. Uraraka, Ida, Kirishima, and Todoroki are walking beside him. If they try to talk to him, he doesn't know. He just feels their eyes on him from time to time. Shinsu joins them at some point as they make their way to the cafeteria. He can vaguely hear the sound of the other students as they get closer to the food court. The noise gets louder with every step he takes. Soon enough, they are all he hears as he stops in front of the doors, his body freezing as his mind screams at him to get away. He's not ready for that many people. He's not prepared. He feels a hand on his shoulder and he can't help but step back. Shinsu's eyes meet his, worry and sadness swimming in his purple orbs. His feet move before his mind catches up. Without realizing it, he's already running back towards the classrooms, ignoring the calls behind him. He wants to just get away from it all. Get away from the worried stares filled with pity and sadness. Broken, they call him. His face meets something hard and he's toppling onto the ground before he can do anything about it. It breaks his spiraling mind and he finds himself focusing back on reality. Look what we have here. A voice calls from above him. It's not anyone he's familiar with. 1A's star kidnappee. Looking up, his eyes meet Monoma's excited gaze. He vaguely remembers him from the sport festival and the training camp. He's never actually spoken to him though. there's a girl beside him. Her hand is on her classmate's shoulder as if she's holding him back. So, the villains finally get tired of you. He hears footsteps behind him and thinks that it's probably his friends. Although he can't be sure. Monoma, stop bothering him. Kendo, he's pretty sure it's her name, says in a low voice. Her expression is apologetic as she looks at him. She moves as if to help him get up, but he's up before she reaches him. He doesn't want anyone touching him at the moment. Oh, don't be such a buzzkill, Kendo. We're just joking around. Right, Midoriya? He smiles at him, a slightly hysterical look flitting over his expression. Without meaning to, Izuku's mind flits back to Shigaraki's face. It phases in and out of his field of vision, blurring the lines between the 1B student and his previous tormentor. Hey, leave him alone, comes an angry voice from behind him, the higher pitch giving away Uraraka's identity. Yeah, not cool, dude. That's Kirishima. Monoma doesn't seem fazed though. His eyes are still trained on Izuku, his eyes flitting up to his hat-covered hair. Nice hat, man. Before Izuku can think to step away, Monoma is already reaching for his hair. His hand encircles the cap's fabric and promptly takes it off his head. The moment the hat is off, silence fills the corridor they are standing in. His hair fall, exposing his white locks to the other's watchful eyes. He feels himself instantly shrinking back, looking for an escape route around the two students blocking his way. The silence is only broken by the laughter coming from the teen in front of him. The sound creates a chain reaction as the others behind him begin to shout at the teen, and Kendo tries to make him stop. Hey, I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting that. Wasn't your hair green? His laughter gets harder and he gets a dangerous gleam in his eyes. Did the villains give you a makeover or something? Izuku uses his distraction to bolt into the opposite hallway, quickly taking the stairs leading up to the roof. Izuku, wait. Uraraka calls out to no avail. He just needs to be alone right now. I'll go after him, Shinsu tells the group as he starts to walk in the direction of the roof. You guys go tell Aizawa about what happened. The roof is quiet when he steps out onto it. A slight breeze goes by, a welcome change amidst the hot rays of sun bearing down onto the concrete space. He doesn't spot him immediately. It's after he steps away from the doors and turns slightly to the right that he sees him. Izuku is sitting on the ground, hands on the rails and feet slightly dangling from the building. It brings dark thought to his mind, flashes of a situation he hopes he will never come across, especially not with his friend. He approaches slowly, making sure his movements are loud and clear, not wanting to startle the teen in front of him. It seems his actions are successful when Midoriya looks back and up at him slowly. Hey, he says, not really knowing what to start with. Izuku looks at him with blank eyes, no emotion showing through the barrier he's built up around himself. Don't listen to Monoma. He's just a childish jerk. Izuku's only response is to turn his gaze back towards the horizon, his eyes looking at the building and fields surrounding the campus. Are you okay? Silence stretches between them and Shinsu thinks that maybe Izuku is just going to ignore him. Although it's a few seconds later that he hears the teen respond. His voice is low, barely above a whisper, and he has to strain to make out the words. He hears them nonetheless. Am I a bad person, Shinsu? It takes him a moment to realize that he should probably say something. Why would you even ask that? The question is not what he expected. Why would Izuku, selfless, heroic Izuku, think he's a bad person? Did they tell you how she died? The teen says, ignoring him once again. He knows who she is without having to ask. I only saw. How did she? It was supposed to be me. The statement cuts through his words like a knife. The meaning behind it is wrong. So blatantly and obviously wrong. It was meant to kill me. Izuku. His voice comes out firm, maybe even louder than he intended. Izuku, look at me. It catches the teen's attention instantly. Emerald eyes turning towards him. Not really meeting his own though. You can't possibly think that this was your fault, right? She was trying to kill you. She did it to herself. His voice rises with every word and he feels tears of frustration well up in his eyes. Because why? Why is this world so wrong that the victim has to feel guilty for merely surviving? But Shinsu. I was just so relieved. Tears pool in Midoriya's eyes as he finally makes eye contact with him. The emotions he's been keeping hidden burst to the surface. They create a whirlwind of expressions flitting through the teen's face. What kind of hero, what kind of person feels relieved when their own mother dies? He's shouting too now. What's wrong with me? Who watches their mothers die and feel relieved? I'm no hero. I'm not even a good person. Before he gets to continue his rant, Shinsu's arms are already around him. The purple-haired teen envelopes him in a hug that makes his entire world stop. His mind screeching to a halt as the warmth, and for the first time in so long, safety washes over him. Don't you dare speak like that ever again. He whispers firmly into his ear. His words crack with emotion as he squeezes him harder. You are not a bad person. You are the furthest thing from it. You are the most selfless and brave person I know. These feelings you are experiencing only help to prove that to me. That woman tormented and abused you for years. She tried to kill you and you proceed to blame yourself for it. He's crying too now. You have every right to feel relieved. But Shinsu. Izuku, look at me. He draws the teen by his shoulders so they are face to face once again, wanting the boy to realize how honest and serious he is. I need you to believe me when I tell you this. He begins intently. You are not a bad person, Izuku. You're just human. A visible weight seems to lift itself from the boy's shoulders and he seems to slump against him in exhaustion. Thank you, Shinsu. The boy mumbles sleepily as they furrow into the shade of the building. A small smile adorns the teen's face. The smile is the first he's seen in weeks. It's not a real smile, far from the blinding one he used to give. But it's there. It's small and tentative, but it's real and it's improvement, and Shinsu couldn't be happier. He hopes he will see that smile more often from now on. He's going to try his damn best to bring it back anyway. Chapter 38. Opening up. The sun is almost setting when Midoriya and Shinsu make it back to the dorms. They don't speak a word throughout the whole way, both of them comfortable in the amicable silence that has settled between them. For once, the quiet doesn't seem so loud anymore. As they arrive at Heights Alliance, they see Aizawa waiting for them in front of the doors. He doesn't spot them right away, but when he does, they can see his back straightening slightly, a slight crease forming between his eyebrows as he notices their bloodshot eyes. They stop in front of him at arm's lengths. Izuku's body longs to erase the distance between them. He wants to feel the safety of his guardian again. Ever since he came back from the hospital, he barely sees him anymore. Aizawa looks at both of them for a second, his eyes scanning them for something. Izuku can't be sure what it is though. Finally, his gaze settles on him. His teacher's eyes seem to convey an unspoken question. Despite the silence, Izuku nods his head slowly. I'm okay, he tries to answer. Monoma will be attending 2 months of detention with Vlad, starting immediately during his 2-week suspension. He'll be on house arrest through it all, Aizawa says, barely concealed anger in his tone. Izuku wants to protest at this. Monoma may have said some mean things, but did he really deserve to be suspended? But no, he will not defend him. He is a hero in training. He was there during the training camp. He should know better. What he did is unacceptable. He's lucky Vlad vouched for him. Otherwise, he'd be expelled. The man left no space for argument, leaving Izuku to just nod in response, albeit hesitantly. Sighing heavily, Aizawa spoke again. Now, are you up to sleeping in your dorm room tonight, or would you prefer spending the night in the apartment at the teacher's section? Why, your apartment, please. Aizawa's gaze softens at that. The anger from before seems to shimmer away. Shinsu excuses himself at that, squeezing Izuku's shoulder one last time before he makes his way back to his dorm room. They are a few minutes away from the teacher's building when Aizawa finally speaks. So, you've been having more nightmares. Izuku's about to play it off, if not for the knowing look in his guardian's eyes. Why, yeah, he admits quietly. You want to talk about it? It's fine, really. You know I used to have them before too. Izuku's gaze shifts to the ground at that. It's not the same now, though, is it? Sometimes, he really hates how perceptive the man is. A few minutes pass and Aizawa thinks that maybe the kid was just going to ignore his question. However, the teen's voice comes out a moment later, voice soft, his words hanging in the cold night's air. It's still her. She's always there. His gaze seems miles away as he finally looks up and ahead of him. Although she's not alone anymore, they are there too. Aizawa doesn't need to ask to know who they are. It's mostly hazy though. I wake up feeling this heaviness, this weight that settles in my chest. But I don't actually remember what they were doing. I just know that it's bad and that I don't want it to happen again. Other times they're not hazy. They're real. I mean they feel real. Like memories. It's these dreams that are the worst. Because when they happen, I forget that I'm out. I forget that I'm supposed to be safe now. And suddenly it's like I'm back there again. Like it's real and it's never going to end. He knows he said too much when he sees the anger in his teacher's gaze. Back at full force, he quietly reminds himself that it's not directed at him. Aizawa would do anything to protect him. You can't keep doing this alone, Izuku. Aizawa catches his eyes with his own as he says this. You can't keep shutting people out. When you have these nightmares, you come to me, or to your friends. I know for a fact that none of them would think twice before helping you. These things, they're hard to get through. What you've faced, what you've been through. You need to let it out. I'm glad you told me about the nightmares tonight. However, you waited for me to come to you. I won't always be able to, and I need to know that. When I don't, you will come to me. The man tries to convey how genuine and serious he is. We're family, and that's what families do. They are there for each other. I know, and he really does. But it's hard. It's going to take time. But trust me when I say this. The more you talk about it, the better you will feel. Once in the apartment, Izuku sits in the living room while Aizawa prepares dinner for both of them. A short while after, they eat in silence. Katsuden. It makes Izuku realize just how much he missed this. Tsukachi called today. Aizawa says suddenly. Yeah, he tries to seem casual, but he doesn't think it works. He wanted to know if you'd be okay to give your testimony tomorrow morning. His guardian begins slowly. After today, I think it would be okay if you want me to push it back to another day. Aizawa watches carefully as Izuku seems to think about it for a moment, looking for any sign of discomfort. The kid seems to come to a decision after a few minutes of contemplation. No, I'll do it. Aizawa can see a flash of the determination his ward keeps in his heart. Maybe you were right. Maybe it will help if someone knows what happened. Might as well get it over with, right? If you're not ready, we don't want to push you. He replies carefully. It's okay if you need more time. I want to, and this way, maybe it will help in their investigation, right? Pride swells in his heart at his kid's bravery and selflessness. He can't help the small smile that forms on his features. Okay, I'll tell him later. Although it's your choice of who you want to be there when he does. See, can you come? I mean, I understand if you can't. You probably have better things. Before he can spiral into an apology spree, Aizawa cuts him off. Nothing is more important, kid. I'll be there if you want me to be. The smile he sees on his ward's face is worth it. Do you want to tell some of your friends too? That makes Izuku pause. Does he? Does he want his friends to know what happened? Would they pity him more? Would they look at him differently? They already do though. Stop it. Aizawa's voice cuts through his thoughts, stopping his doubts at once. I know that look. Your friends care about you. I think it'll be good to have at least one of them there for support. Maybe it will make it easier for you if you want to talk to them about everything someday. He tries to find some kind of protest, but the more he thinks about it, the more he knows that Aizawa is right. Shinsu. I'll ask Shinsu. The teen proved to him just how caring and understanding he could be many times, after all. And that's that. They spend the rest of the night watching random movies on the TV. Izuku snuggled up under a blanket, Gray curled up in his lap as they sit there in peaceful silence. Eventually, without even meaning to, he falls asleep. His head rested against Aizawa's shoulder. He doesn't dream that night. The next morning comes sooner than expected. He wakes up later than usual. It's the first time in forever that he feels like he's actually rested. He notices Aizawa watching him from his place at the kitchen counter. A coffee mug rests between his hands. A fond smile adorns his features. Good morning, kid, he says as he goes in for a sip of the hot beverage. Sleep well. Morning, Izuku mumbles back, hazy sleepiness still consuming some of his thoughts. What time is it? It's nearly 10 o'clock, his teacher responds with a smirk. Suddenly Izuku feels wide awake. Don't we have class? He nearly shouts, if not for the years of learning to keep his voice down. We have to go to the police station, remember? Yes, he forgot about that. Aizawa seems to notice his hesitation though. Only if you're still up to it though. No, I am. I just forgot about it. His hand comes up to rub his neck. Sorry, it's okay. Although you do need to get dressed. I already talked to Shinsu. I thought I'd make it easier for you. They both agreed immediately. Gratitude swells inside him. Aizawa really knows him, doesn't he? Shinsu gets the call really early in the morning. At first, he thinks there's something wrong. Because why would Aizawa call him for anything else at this hour? It's not like they had any training scheduled for today. However, it turns out that it's not something bad. It's stressful though. That's another thing on its own. He feels honored that his friend has that much trust in him. He also feels unworthy of that trust. Because, what did he do when his friend was in danger? Nothing, although they tried. In the end, they couldn't help him at all. Determination swells inside of him as he comes to a decision. He wasn't able to be there for his friend back then. But maybe he can be there for him now. They are waiting by the car for him when he arrives. He greets them both. Izuku immediately goes into a tangent about how he doesn't need to come if he doesn't want to. How it's okay if he can't. He promptly stops him with a raised hand and a shake of his head, not even looking back as he settles himself in the back seat. Aizawa and Izuku sitting next to each other at the front. The ride goes smoothly. Aizawa talks to Shinsu about training and the transfer papers that are in his future if he stays on this track. The giddiness he feels is welcomed with open arms. Izuku even turns around to give him an excited smile despite the stress he must be feeling. They all knew that the testimony is going to be hard on him most of all. They arrive on time. Sakachi immediately meeting them in the lobby and leading them to a small room near his office. I'm glad to see you're doing better, Midoriya, he says genuinely as soon as he sees Midoriya. I'm sorry we have to do this now. I wish we didn't have to, but it will be really helpful to the investigation. Izuku smiles back at him, nodding his head in agreement. It's good to see you too, Tsukachi-san. I want to help in any way I can. The room they walk into doesn't look like an interrogation room. It's more of a lounge. There's a small couch and a coffee table, with a small plant in the corner. It helps to quell some of the anxiousness that Izuku's feeling. Okay, so first, I wanted to talk to you about your options, Tsukachi says as he gestures for them to take a seat. He himself sits in a chair right across from them. Options? Aizawa questions. Suakuchi seems to expect the question, if the way he immediately replies is of any indication. In terms of how are we going to go about this, the next words are directed at Izuku. You can either have a normal testimony, where I'll be asking you questions and you will try to respond to the best of your abilities. Of course, keeping in mind that you can stop at any given moment. Whenever you feel like it's too much, you just say so and it's over. He reassures softly, showing just how much he has experience in this kind of situation. Izuku nods his head slowly. What's the second option? He asks carefully. The second option is usually what most people go for. It's kind of unconventional since we are the only department with this quirk specialist. But it's effective and easier for the witnesses. His fingers are hooked together as he speaks, his gaze still focused on Izuku. You still haven't told us what it is, Aizawa says gruffly, a hint of frustration in his tone. Ah yes, Tasukachi laughs bashfully as he rubs his neck. Like the first one, you can stop at any moment in this too. However, the questioning would be done via a quirk specialist. He makes a gesture for someone outside of the room and a few seconds later, a man enters the room, wearing similar clothes to the staff members they saw down in the lobby. Tom here, he gestures towards the man, has a quirk that lets him show people's memories depending on the specific question that we ask. Like a projection, if you will. He'll be unconscious through it all though, so he won't actually be seeing your memories. He explains slowly, the man in question giving a small wave when mentioned. How does it work, exactly? Izuku asks hesitantly. Tom is the one who answers this time. Well, think of me as a DVD player if you will. With skin contact, at will, I'll be able to go into a controlled sleep-induced state. Basically, by holding your hand and willing my quirk to work, I'll be able to project your memories like you'd project a movie. Although, Tsukachi is going to have to ask you questions for the memories to be triggered. It's not going to always be continuous scenes. Sometimes it's just small clips of what comes to your mind when hearing the questions. Some witnesses find it easier than talking about it, because this way, you can show us without having to put the experience into words. Tsukachi continues, how do I stop if I want to? Izuku clenches the hem of his shirt tightly as he speaks, nerves once again getting the best of him. You can stop whenever you want by breaking contact with Tom. Just remove your hand from his. Won't it be harder though? Shinsu speaks up for the first time. Reliving it, I mean. The teen voicing Izuku's fears perfectly. I won't sugarcoat it for you. It will be hard, watching what you've been through like that. His voice is louder now, tone earnest and serious, although I can tell you that it's not any harder than trying to describe it and explain it. Both of the testimonies consist of you remembering the things you went through while you were with the villains. Izuku looks at Aizawa for a moment, wanting some kind of advice or prompt from the man. Do whatever makes you feel more comfortable, kid. This isn't an interrogation. You can choose neither if you want to. However, I'll be there for whatever you decide to go with. Looking in Shinsu's direction, the purple-haired teen nods at him reassuringly. Okay, I'll do it. The second option, I mean. While Tsukachi and Tom were preparing, Izuku took it as an opportunity to call All Might. If they were going to see his memories, they were going to find out about his quirk. The man was apprehensive at first, but finally, he conceded that it was probably for the best. Aizawa was his guardian, after all, and Shinsu proved himself to be worthy enough of this kind of trust. Promising to see him later, Izuku ended the call, feeling slightly better about what he was about to do. Having seen him talking to someone on the phone, both teacher and student were looking questionably at him when he walked back towards them. I need to tell you both something before we do this. His nervousness was palpable, causing both listeners to stand straighter, giving him their full attention. What is it? Shinsu prompted. Whatever it is, you don't have to look so nervous, kid. We won't be mad. Aizawa continued, noticing Izuku's behavior. It's not that. It's more like, what I'm about to tell you should remain a secret no matter what. Was he really going to do this? Both of them nodded seriously, knowing that if Izuku wouldn't ask this if it wasn't necessary. Aizawa, you already know this, but I was quirkless before coming to UA. Shinsu's breath seemed to hitch at that. Aizawa only nodding in response. Is that why your mother? Shinsu asked, anger and shock evident in his voice. Yes, more or less. Izuku didn't let him finish. He couldn't defer from the subject now. He needed to tell them before doing the testimony. He took in a deep breath, thinking about how he would phrase this. I never told you how exactly I got my quirk though. Something flashed in Aizawa's eyes, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. Don't tell me that the villain that All Might fought gave you. No, Izuku shouted, only realizing that he did a moment later. Nervously checking around if anyone was listening, he continued. No, of course not. But I did get it from someone else. He mumbled finally. Aizawa seemed to relax a little at that, but tension could still be seen in his shoulders. Elaborate, problem child, he said after a moment, his eyes gentle despite the shock he's feeling. And so he does. He tells them everything. He tells them about his quirk's origin, about All for One and One for All. He tells them about meeting Toshinori and training and getting into UA. By the time he's done, his throat feels scratchy from all the talking. His heart hammers in his chest as he waits for any sort of response from the two standing in front of him. Aizawa has an unreadable expression adorning his features. Shinsu, on the other hand, looks shell-shocked. His eyes are as wide as saucers as he looks at Izuku, as if seeing him for the first time. "Well, are you going to say something?" he asks after a minute. The silence that has settled between them is starting to get to him. He can feel himself starting to sweat under Aizawa's blank stare. This gets a reaction out of them. Shinsu seems to blink a couple of times before straightening up and smiling at him. "This makes so much more sense now," he says. Izuku would smile back if he wasn't so afraid of what Aizawa was going to say. The latter is still staring at him intently, eyes as indecipherable and intense as ever. The man raises his hand after a moment, and Izuku's body reacts instinctively, immediately tensing and flinching under the sudden movement, his shoulders rising, hands almost following to shield himself. He waits for the impending pain, but nothing happens. Instead, he feels something ruffling his hair. Opening his eyes, only now realizing he'd closed them in the first place, he realizes that Aizawa was just patting his head. Guilt swirls inside him as he realizes the reaction he had. This was Aizawa. He would never hurt him. "I'm not mad, problem child." His voice is soft, no trace of deception in his tone. "I knew there was something between you and All Might. I just wish that you told me earlier. We'll have to talk about this in more detail later, with All Might present. But for now, let's take one thing at a time, okay?" Izuku can only nod at that, relief flooding his system. His body loses some of its previous tension. With Aizawa and Shinsu at his side, maybe this whole memory thing wasn't going to be as hard. As if knowing that the conversation was over, Tsukachi's head pops through the door to the designated room. "Everything is ready if you'd like to start. And with that, I'll see you all in the next part. For those who are interested, we have a Discord down below. Be sure to aim for the stars, and drink plenty of water. And take care until next we see each other again."